Welcome to the top 12 highlights of Chapter 4. We're going to look at the political culture and ideology of our nation. And looking at number one, let's start by differentiating between political culture and political ideology. Political culture are the widely shared beliefs, what we talked about in U.S. history class as the common good. What do we share? The idea of freedom, of liberty, those big picture items. Ideology is very personal. It's hard for you to compromise based on ideology. Where culture, we tend to define liberty and freedom in different ways as time goes on. But political ideology is about your beliefs, what's most important to you and why. And the political culture centers on those democratic values, as I mentioned, of liberty, of responsibility and freedom and that sort of thing. The shared values, where do they come from? This Magleby talks about them coming from what Locke talked about in terms of natural rights, this idea of life, liberty, property, the Protestant work ethic, that people work hard and can redeem themselves for part of that. That's where capitalism comes from. This idea of economic inequality in terms of sharing the wealth in terms of paying your fair share to the government, but then the rest is yours. The rest is yours because of that Protestant work ethic. That idea of hard work is going to help us to become better citizens and become better members of our family and that sort of thing. So equality, private property, freedom, liberty, limited government, all of these are part of our political culture, but how we define them and how we actually carry them out are where we see a lot of differences in terms of where that actually happens. We look at political socialization in terms of where this comes from. Who is the number one politically, the number one way we are politically socialized is our family. Friends, school, religion, media, there's so many other things that impact that, but family is number one. It's most important. Because if you think about how much time you spend with your family over the course of those formative years, even up until now, your teenage years, you spend most of it with your family. Those waking hours, the weekends, the after school until the before school, they're all spent up to this point with family. All of those experiences, going with parents to vote, working on a campaign, or going to a barbecue or a rubber chicken dinner, all of those things to get you socialized with politics and elections and campaigns are being done by family members. And that's traditionally where we see that coming from. So family, most important of all in terms of that political socialization. We have a mixed market economy. It is semi-regulated. We don't want excessive government regulation of our businesses, which is why we call it mixed. A market economy is free. That allows a fair approach. A command economy, like China, for instance, is where the government is involved in all of the decision making. We're kind of mixed because we have the government step in more from a health and safety point of view. When people get sick or something goes wrong, the health department comes in. The government steps in emergency situations like Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Irma. The government steps in to semi-regulate, but the idea is then they get out of the way and let the markets kind of do their thing. So it's very much a mixed market economy because we value, again, that economic individualism. You work hard, you become the next founder of the next big Google or the next Microsoft or the next Amazon, then you get to keep that money once you've paid your fair share to the in taxes to Uncle Sam and that sort of thing. So that's very much a mixed market economy in terms of trying to help the disadvantaged, but also telling people, hey, that Protestant work ethic we talked about in number 2 is all about letting people be individual in nature in terms of getting things done. So let's look at political ideology a little further in terms of the major ideologies that tend to be in American politics today. We associate them with the two major political parties. We have liberalism associated with the Democrats and conservatism with the Republicans. Now, obviously on the political spectrum, you take that liberalism, or you take the Democrats out further and further to the left, you get liberalism. And if you take it far, 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 far away to the left, you get socialism, the idea of kind of government dictating everything. But if you take conservatism to the right, you get Republicans, and you get moderate Republicans, and then you get conservatism and more extreme conservatism the further right you go. And if you take it way, 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 way out to the right, as far as you did to the left, you get fascism. So on the very, very far ends, and we're talking like the far ends of the room, not the far ends of the screen, we see this idea of you can take either one to a level that is way, way, way too far. But what do we know about Downs' theory of rational choice, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that most people are in the middle. Most people are in the moderate, moderate to liberal or moderate to conservative. They swing back and forth. Now, how does libertarianism and socialism fit into this? Libertarianism, that idea of getting government out of everything completely, a total market economy, no government regulation. And then we have socialism, which we tend to tend to associate with totalitarianism, which we talked about in class, which is government is in everything, in the social and the economic aspects. And most people, however, fit right here. They fit right in the parameters of the circle. They may be liberal in nature or libertarian in nature, sometimes socialist in nature, but they tend to fit within this this gold circle that we see here. They may be conservative with libertarian components, but again, they're mainly in the circle in terms of what we see in the values that are shared. So liberalism, how do we define this? Really, government intervention in the economy from an economic point of view, not from a social aspect point of view. And this equal access to health care, affirmative action, protections for workers' rights, all of these defining liberalism. And abortion, same-sex marriage, the environment tend to be the issues we see most in that space. Conservatism, we look at from more social intervention on the abortion and the same-sex marriage issues, less so on the economic front, the opposite of what we saw with liberals. Pure conservatives are going to want little to no government involvement economically, letting the markets kind of do their thing, but then stepping in from a social perspective where need be in order to make sure that moral rights are maintained and the government inhibits anything beyond what the moral values are. And we see that in conservatism. Traditional conservatives tend to be pro-business, less focused on the social aspects. Social conservatives, much more on morality and lifestyle. You're looking at same-sex marriage as an issue, abortion as an issue, drugs and pornography, affirmative action. Social conservatives tend to be against that. They see government as regulating that morality, where traditional conservatives do not. They're more pro-business, lower taxes, less regulation, get government out of the economic side. So that really is a key difference between traditional conservatives and the social conservatives. Now, critics of liberalism say that we rely too much on government. This going back to Ronald Reagan's quote about, the 9 worst words anybody wants to hear is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And this is where we see the individualism being destroyed. Well, if government's going to protect everyone and everybody's going to rely on government, then they're not going to rely on individualism and hard work. The Protestant work ethic that we talked about in Chapter 4 is really going to go by the wayside. So critics of liberalism tend to say, oh, it's big government and, big brother and the nanny state, and everybody needs to really think about that, because it then gets encroaching into markets and economic aspects, which conservatives tend to oppose. Now, critics of conservatism will say deregulation hasn't worked. You say get government out of the way, but every time we get government out of the way, then something happens, like the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. We see deregulation, helped different industries in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was president, but look what happened in the early 90s. We ended up with a recession, and people made lots of money at the detriment of the poor and other aspects of that. So there are two sides to that coin in terms of the critics of liberalism and conservatism in terms of what's happening there. Socialism or public ownership, kind of a differentiating between socialism and communism here, because the idea here is socialism is that everybody kind of shares in the wealth as part of that public ownership, and then the government kind of doles out what is what is needed for each person in order to maintain their life and well-being. Communism, it's collectively owned. Everything is collectively owned by all of the people. It's not really government that steps in to own it. It's really everybody as part of the greater common good owns it, and then the masses really exercise that political power there. Libertarianism, again, we get government out of the picture socially and economically. So libertarians like Rand Paul would be more libertarian on an economic front, less so on a social front. We see them kind of siding with conservatives on the social issues, less so, as well as the economic ones. But libertarians, true libertarians, would be opposed to government intervention in economic or social aspects. Truly a perfect libertarian would not want government involvement in any of the social or economic aspects. Now, downstairs of rational choice, as we talked about in class, is this space here where we are in between. We're in the middle. We swing to the left and liberals win. We swing to the right, conservatives win. We saw this in the 2008-2012 elections, actually 2006, the end of the Iraq War, where liberals took over Congress, and President Obama swept into office in 2008. Then we saw in 2010 that the voting electorate actually swung to the right, and conservatives took over Congress again. Then we saw they swung to the left again in the election of President Obama re-election in 2012, swung back to the right in 2014, and tended to stay there in 2016. So to be continued as to where they're going to be in 2018, but the idea is Downs' theory of rational choice, Anthony Downs, the political scientist that came up with this model, really says that people tend to be somewhere in the middle, and elections are won, they're fought, and won or lost here, right here, between slightly liberal and slightly conservative. So a moderate may swing to the left or swing to the right, but that's really where you want to capture that audience, because you're not going to get them on the liberal side, you're not going to get them on the conservative side. You're going to win elections right here in the middle. That's it for Chapter 4. Hope you found this helpful, and hope you do well on the upcoming quiz. Live the 5, as you always do in demonstrating your awesomeness. Have a great day, and as always, if you have questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, either email me, find me on social media, or come see me in room 110. I'm always happy to help.